Hello, this is Dr. Courtney Alston. Please leave your name and message after the. Well, just kidding. Kinda. It's kind of true. Yes, you can officially leave a message with Courting Happiness. We have launched our own voicemail. We have liftoff, and I'm so happy to share that with you. You can leave a message about how the podcast has helped you, or share a question, pitch a future topic, or simply tell us that we're doing a great job. We would love to hear that, hear from you, and much more. Grab your phone, laptop, or your tablet and leave a message right now. Go to our website at drcourtneyalston.com/voicemail. That's drcourtneyalston.com/voicemail. So let's get back to the podcast. Welcome to the Courting Happiness podcast. This is a space where self-care becomes part of your day. A space where you learn evidence-based strategies to help your life, share it with those you love, and cultivate well-being at work. I'm your host, Dr. Courtney Alston. I'm a former news director, television reporter turned happiness scholar, TEDx speaker, and transformational trainer. I also understand hardships. While working my dream job in television, I lived a nightmare suddenly becoming a young widow after 86 days of marriage. I became committed to learning more about resilience, healing, and happiness. This is how I discovered my area of research, which is positive psychology. Now I'm living my calling of training individuals and organizations on happiness. And my new chapter begins with being happily engaged. The Courting and Courting Happiness is about a true courtship. I like to say commitment with happiness. The K in courting stands for the vulnerability of sharing my story, inspirational interviews with phenomenal people, the infusion of positive psychology, and so much more. You'll learn how to commit to your well-being one episode at a time. I hope you subscribe and share. So, are you ready? Let's get started. Welcome to episode 58. I'm Dr. Courtney Alston. I'm so happy that you're here. Have you ever gone to work and faked being fine? You know what I mean. When you pretend nothing is wrong with you. So maybe about a week ago, I posted a picture of me faking fine when I was working on my PhD. I was stressed over the program and just so overwhelmed by all the other dynamics. On top of that, my mother was dying. But I snapped all these selfies of myself at that time, just smiling. And that very picture that I posted, well, I was faking fine. I was just faking it. Well, we have an expert that will empower you to never fabricate your emotions.
It's been stressful. And we felt like many of us have felt like we can't take time off or we can't stop and say, look, I need to slow down. And so I felt like I just had to be perfect for a long time. And on top of that, I've been a corporate trainer for about 10 years. So there's very much a persona, very much a feeling of being on stage. So you add all those things together, you get a very stressed out person. And so I felt like I had to do that for a long time. And actually, as my book came out in April and I started to publicize it, I felt like, or I was forced to be a lot more open about what's going on in my life. And that spilled over into the workplace. There was a lot of pressure on all of us to keep performing and keep doing things. And yes, we had to keep going, but I felt an obligation to myself to speak up for my health. So finally, I planned it out and had a conversation with my boss about maybe needing to slow some things down. I was transparent about my mental health problems, and she was very compassionate. We haven't resolved everything yet. We've been working slowly through things piece by piece, but I feel a lot more calm. I felt like a huge weight was lifted off my shoulders once I could be open about who I am.
That's Melanie Gibson. She's a speaker and author of Kicking and Screaming, a memoir of madness and martial arts. She has made it her mission to help individuals have transformative talks about mental health at work. Melanie shares her journey and provides tips to help you focus on workplace well-being. Melanie, thank you so much for being here. I have been so excited about talking with you and having you on the Courting Happiness podcast. I really treasure and value the work that you're doing in regards to mental health and for us to kind of build our courage, so to speak, right? As it relates to being able to have these can be a very challenging conversation in regards to mental health in the workplace. But before we get started to share some of that insight and some of those tips, one of the things that I really, really treasure about you, because I love the fact that you talk about faking fine in the workplace. And I that really resonated with me because I think when we think about the workplace, we often think about uh, not sharing certain maybe elements of ourselves, right? Or kind of having that mask where everything is okay, nothing to see here, right? But then inside there's a lot of things that may not be okay. Why is it important to no longer kind of really fake fine in the workplace?
Well, first of all, Dr. Courtney, thank you so much for having me on the show. I've been excited to talk to you as well.
Yay, I'm so
So,
happy you're here.
oh yeah, yeah. So talking about more serious things with faking fine, that is something I have done almost my entire adult life in the working world. I have worked in healthcare for about 17 years, going on 18. And you would think you could be open about your mental health in healthcare, but even there's a stigma. There's an expectation to be perfect. And I work on the corporate side of things. So there's even more of an expectation with that corporate America piece behind it. Working in healthcare during a pandemic has been very interesting too, because you feel like you just have to keep going. You can't stop working. Now, I am not frontline clinical. I don't want to steal their spotlight, but even behind the scenes, it's been stressful. And we felt like many of us have felt like we can't take time off or we can't stop and say, look, I need to slow down. And so I felt like I just had to be perfect for a long time. And on top of that, I've been a corporate trainer for about 10 years. So there's very much a persona, very much a feeling of being on stage. So you add all those things together, you get a very stressed out person. And so I felt like I had to do that for a long time. And actually, as my book came out in April and I started to publicize it, I felt like, or I was forced to be a lot more open about what's going on in my life. And that spilled over into the workplace. There was a lot of pressure on all of us to keep performing and keep doing things. And yes, we had to keep going, but I felt an obligation to myself to speak up for my health. So finally, I planned it out and had a conversation with my boss about maybe needing to slow some things down. I was transparent about my mental health problems, and she was very compassionate. We haven't resolved everything yet. We've been working slowly through things piece by piece, but I feel a lot more calm. I felt like a huge weight was lifted off my shoulders once I could be open about who I am. And so it's something it was a long time coming, but I don't regret doing it at all.
I love that. First of all, I just love that you have shared so many different elements of your life in regards to your journey and really talking about a topic or really an issue that so many of us, especially I would think so many of us, especially during the pandemic, are coping with. Because when you were also sharing about healthcare and the challenges in terms of healthcare and working in terms of that working in the healthcare industry, I thought about the fact that for the past year, I've actually lost two primary care physicians. One decided to leave the office and to focus on her family and told me it was because of the pandemic and certain dynamics in terms of the pandemic. And then the other has left. He didn't share as much with me as she did. I don't know, but I don't know if it was because we're women and there was a level of comfortability. But but what can we learn from organizations that may not embrace the importance of well-being in the workplace? And then I will look forward to hearing more about what we can do to kind of salute those who are creating these, powerful workplaces like the one that you just shared as relates to your supervisor and your experience. But what can we learn, or what can we learn from organizations that just do not embrace levels of workplace well-being?
I think we're seeing it with the phenomenon called the Great Resignation. And I've heard that spoken about in my workplace. I know our officers are paying attention to that and trying to do something about it. And I've seen it on LinkedIn, I've seen it pop up. So I think organizations are learning the hard way that if you don't address mental wellness and mental well-being, employees are going to walk. It's an employees marketplace right now. And I'm sorry it took a global pandemic for organizations to learn that. I think that's something that's independent of a pandemic. We need to have mental health and mental well-being as a standard for our employees. But we're seeing people leave. We're seeing people quit, retire, start their own businesses, move to other companies. And so this has been a huge wake-up call to organizations that you have to treat employees better. And I'm not just talking about the companies where employees are working remotely. We've seen a lot of people leave in the service industry, in the restaurant industry. And some of these restaurants are saying, well, I just don't know why people aren't coming back. Well, maybe you're not paying them a great wage. Maybe you're not giving them the ability to schedule their shifts in time that they can plan out childcare or other things in their lives. So I think the tables are turning for just overall employee wellness in the workplace. And part of that includes addressing employee mental health.
Absolutely. I love that you talked about how the tables are turning. And it's interesting that the pandemic, it felt like it almost magnified it and almost accelerated the process for us to get here to have really these candid conversations as it relates to mental health and workplace well-being. So let's talk more about that courageous conversation that you had with your supervisor. How did you even go about preparing for that?
That was a long time coming, and I'll give my organization props because they are trying. They are trying to be more progressive with addressing employee well-being and mental health, especially the frontline workers. We have people working in the ER, in the ICU. I work for a large hospital and a clinic system. So right in the middle of the pandemic, and in Texas, it's raging right now. So you can imagine. So they're doing things for them. One of the things my company has done is have some what they call self-care check-ins. And so it's run by, I believe, a social worker and a counselor. And it's not meant to be a counseling session. And is not, they're clear about that. It's not meant to be a venting session about the company. It's just meant to talk about some coping skills and how we're feeling, maybe on a scale of 1 to 10, and a safe place for people to talk about their frustrations with the pandemic overall, to care for themselves. So that's something I've taken part in for the last several months. And even if I just get on and listen and I don't really contribute or participate in the chat or anything, it's nice to know that they're recognizing that this is a hard time and we're human beings. So to the conversation with my boss, we have a pretty good relationship. We worked together as peers for a while, and then she took over as the director role a couple of years ago. So we've had an established relationship. And so that was one thing that was on my side. So what I started doing was when I was feeling really bad in the spring of this year, first of all, I sought out treatment from a mental health professional. So that was something we have an employee assistance program. I was able to, do the work with my insurance company and get matched up with the right provider. So if somebody's having a hard time, of course, I recommend doing that. And I will say I'm not a mental health care professional, so all the stories coming from me are anecdotal. And so always get that recommendation from your licensed health professional. So I did that first. And in my lowest, most desperate moments, I thought, well, I just can't stand another minute of working. I've just got to quit. Well, I don't have, say, $1 million sitting in my back pocket, so I can't just do that. So I had to do something. And I started writing, not a letter, but a statement, writing out how I was feeling, because that's how I best express myself, is through writing out how I'm feeling, some questions I wanted to ask. And I just kept working on this document. And part of it was just kind of spilling my guts and venting my feelings and getting it out. And then I started editing it down. And I planned a conversation with her. So a couple of recommendations on that, if you want to plan a conversation with your boss, is if you need to talk about something serious, don't send them an email at 4:45 on a Friday afternoon. Don't send them a text at 8 o'clock at night. Plan it out if you can, unless it's an absolutely desperate emergency situation. Plan it out if you can. If you can't meet in person, do it virtually. That's what we did. We met over Microsoft Teams. We had our cameras on. And I said, I need to talk to you about some things. And I said, I'm going to read from something because that's how I express myself. So I'll just read and then we can talk, and I'm sure you'll have questions. So I read and she listened and she had a few questions. And just having that conversation was, again, a huge weight lifted off my shoulders. I didn't list out all the details of my mental health. I didn't list out all my diagnoses. I kept it related to how I'm feeling in the workplace, how it's affecting my performance, how it's affecting how I feel about my job, and some areas where I need some help. I didn't have solutions right away, and I didn't expect her to have solutions right away either. So that's something I recommend too, is if you come to your boss with this, maybe have a few solutions in your back pocket, but don't expect them to solve it right away. It's a lot that they're going to have to digest as well. So think of it as the beginning of a conversation. And it has been the beginning of a conversation because we've talked off and on over the last few months. And it's gotten to the point that I've been able to get some Americans with Disability Act ADA accommodations to make sure I'm taking care of my mental health. I also have an injury surgery situation going on too. So my physical health is involved as well. But starting that conversation has been eye-opening for me and my boss, and making us both realize that we've all got to prioritize our mental health. And I don't regret doing that at all. My only regret is that I didn't do it sooner.
I love that. I love that I love how you organized it in terms of writing out your feelings, because I think what's so important when we're going through challenges as relates to our health, our mental health, right? I think it's important for us to honor our feelings throughout the dynamic. And sometimes I think when we're dealing with certain challenges as relates to our well-being, we can try to kind of rationalize it like, oh, come on, you can do that. But no, it's no, let's really reevaluate this. Yeah, you might be able to do it, but how are you feeling doing it? And I love what you're sharing in regards to acknowledging all of the dynamics in terms of the experience, but looking at it in terms of performance, as well as it relates to, well, okay, let me also reevaluate how this is making me feel, how I can kind of work through this, and what maybe the employer can do to kind of serve as partners in this dynamic. And
Mm-hmm.
so let's talk about that partnership, because one of the things you mentioned was ADA. And for our audience that may be seeking certain accommodations, can you tell us a little bit more about ADA and how it has served you in terms of your journey?
Right. The ADA is the Americans with Disabilities Act, and it serves as protection for both the employer and the employee in making sure people have what they need to do their job. So it may be visual aids, it may be a wheelchair ramp, it may be if it's a mental situation, maybe the ability to take some time off or to have a flexible schedule, or whatever that is. It also protects your time off that you need to take for appointments. So for example, I'll share a little bit of mine. I've got some accommodations for both my mental and my physical health. I had a knee injury last year in surgery. And so I can cover that time that I take to go see my doctor or my other healthcare providers to care for my knee. And that time is protected. That means it's kind of like FMLA. Your job is protected in relation to these physical conditions. So they can't come in and say, well, Melanie, you're taking off too much time to get care for your knee or to see your therapist. We're going to fire you. So you're protected by law under the Americans with Disabilities Act. Your employer cannot discriminate against you based on your mental or your physical health conditions. So I'm not an expert in it, but all of this information is available online. And then also your HR professionals at your organization will have this information too. Now I work closely with HR, but I'm not in HR, so I'm not an expert in that. We do have, I think they call it the IDM department, so Integrated Disability Management. So most companies, maybe not very small ones, but most companies will have some kind of, they may call it disability management or employee health or some faction of HR that deals with requests like this. So getting accommodations for whatever your health condition is. And so we are protected by a law under the Americans with Disabilities Act. Now, what was interesting for me was, as a recovering perfectionist and getting over my own stigma toward my mental health, is having a physical health problem kind of helped me ease into it. Because I'm going through this knee issue at the same time. I don't know if I may have been more reluctant to stand up and ask for accommodations for my mental health had I not had this physical condition going on. So that's just my personal situation. But for anybody who has any kind of physical or mental condition going on, you are protected by the Americans with Disabilities Act. Your HR department will know about it. So I suggest, it depends on your relationship with your boss too. You may need to get some more information. So talk with HR, talk with employee health, look up the ADA online and get some information. And so that way you're coming in informed, and you can help inform your boss as well. And so, so this department has worked with my boss, and they've worked out all the agreements and everything. And it's been great being able to just be recognized, saying, yes, you're a human being. And we all need to put our physical and mental health first, and it's helping me do that.
It's interesting. I loved I love that you shared you're a human being. I think sometimes, and as you mentioned earlier, in terms of valuing working at a certain level, and sharing elements of yourself, but we also have to remember that we're human, and that it's okay to not be okay, and it's also okay to ask for help, and it's also okay to honor those feelings, as you mentioned earlier. I love that you are talking about these conversations, and what they can look like. How did you come up with the dynamic of, you mentioned earlier, kind of sharing it in generalities, but not going specific? Because for a person that might be dealing with health issues, or mental health issues at work, right? They may feel, maybe I should just tell my boss specifically what it is,
Mm-hmm.
right? So what would you advise for them to kind of work through as it relates to sharing elements of their health issues?
Mm-hmm. Oh, that's a great question. And it may be a more complicated answer, because some of it depends on your relationship with your boss. Some of it depends on the dynamics with work. Another thing with the ADA, and for what I've been told by an employee health nurse, is that you are not required to disclose what exactly your issues are, and you cannot be forced to take leave without your consent or without your agreement. So I thought about that, of what I needed to tell my boss, and what was relevant to my work. So, for example, I have bipolar disorder. I didn't think that was necessarily relevant to the work that I was doing. I had been having some mood swings, but those had calmed down. Just for me personally, it was more of anxiety that was a big issue for me. So, and I also had an eating disorder flare up while I was in kind of in the throes of my worst mental health feelings earlier this year. So I think the way I worded it to her was, I have mental health conditions, including an eating disorder. So just knowing that, kind of as a red light to her, saying, this is something really serious that's affecting my mental and physical health that's going on right now. It's really up to, it depends on the condition, it depends on the situation. For me personally, and if I've had subsequent conversations with my boss, the anxiety is what's the most aggravated by work-related things. So I think that's more relevant to share with her than necessarily saying, well, I have clinical depression. Well, I have bipolar disorder. Well, sometimes I have anorexia off and on. Those aren't necessarily relevant. I think if you're having this conversation with your boss, it's not like you need to keep it a secret. We don't want to further stigmatize mental health, but you also don't have to disclose everything. The same thing with my knee. There's a lot going on with my knee, and I'd love to talk about my knee surgery, but I don't need to disclose everything that's going on. We need to keep it professional and keep it relevant to the work that you're doing.
I love that in terms of keeping it professional, keeping it in terms of the work that you're doing, and also valuing really your privacy, right?
Hmm.
Because when you're dealing with health concerns, it can be really overwhelming. I just
Hmm.
finished talking to a friend just recently who has been going through several health challenges and was actually just had a biopsy as relates to another health challenge. And one of the things that this individual shared with me was, wow, this is a person who's had probably almost a dozen surgeries, who has been dealing with health issues for 20 years. And one of the things that the individual shared was, whew, this is overwhelming. This is overwhelming. And so when we're dealing with so many different dynamics, and if you're an individual listening who's dealing with all of these different challenges, what advice would you offer in regards to, you know, kind of evaluating their current situation, but what steps to take? Because it can be really, as I mentioned, overwhelming to think
Hmm.
about, how am I going to go about even addressing this? So maybe what are some of the things that you decided to kind of help practice that really helped you in terms of really, honestly, Melanie, having this courageous conversation in regards to your health and mental health?
Hmm. I did talk about this with my therapist before I had the conversation with my boss. And that helped me let off some steam too, because I still have my moments where I thought, well, I should just quit. I should just quit. And then I won't be so stressed out anymore. And the therapist was like, well, let's pump the brakes on that a little bit. So, and again, it depends. Somebody who is going through multiple rounds of chemo is in a different situation than somebody else who may occasionally need to see a therapist or go to the physical therapist or something like that. So everybody's health situation is different. So talk with your healthcare providers, because you're probably not the first patient they've had who has had to get some kind of accommodations with their job or have a conversation with their boss about time off or time off for appointments or things like that, or getting, special equipment at home or something like, or being able to work from home for an extended period of time. So talk with your healthcare providers. I've had to have my doctor and therapist fill out paperwork, and I felt bad about it, but they're like, "Oh, same old, same old. We've done this before." So talking with your healthcare provider about it too, because they're experts on your health, and so they're also your advocates. They're your advocates for your mental and physical health. So when I did my ADA, submitted my ADA paperwork to my organization, my therapist had filled out a lot of things on there. Like, Melanie needs this, Melanie needs that. And as I read through it, I thought, I didn't even think about that. I do need, X, Y, Z. So they can be the greatest advocates for what you need, and they can help you articulate what you might need in the workplace, or some flexibility around certain things, or some accommodations you might need. So healthcare providers are your first stop for advocating for your health.
I love that in terms of really emphasizing the value of healthcare providers and serving as champions, really,
Mm-hmm.
right? As it relates to our health in terms of both mental health and also in terms of our physical dynamics as it relates to our health as well. So I also really value that throughout this journey you have really taken upon yourself to not only have this courageous conversation with your supervisor, but it's matched with this incredible, courage in terms of sharing the message. Why is it so important for you to share this really, really powerful message and work?
It's a matter of life and death for some people. So too many people are still dying by suicide. Too many people are still turning to drugs and alcohol to cope with their problems. And I'm just talking in terms of mental health issues. Is mental health conditions are a big deal in this country. 1 in 5 adults in the United States has some kind of mental health condition, and that's probably been exacerbated by this pandemic. And we're almost 2 years into it now. Is that some people are experiencing mental distress for the first time, or other people like me who have clinically diagnosed conditions felt them exacerbated and worsened over that time. So we're seeing this almost explosion in mental health distress, but our country doesn't have a great way of coping with it because we've got this American corporate work culture of, well, you just buckle down and do your job and pretend everything's fine and pretend you're perfect. And that's killing people. It's ruining lives. So I now that I have a platform since my book came out, and it's given me this opportunity to talk about it, I feel like I have a responsibility to lead by example and practice what I preach. For the longest time, I thought I had to hide my mental health status in the workplace and not ask for help. And that was affecting my moods. It was affecting my personal life. It was sometimes even affecting my work performance. And so it was a lose-lose situation. So I'm a better employee because I'm open about it. And I feel like I'm a better person because of it too. So it's my job and my obligation to practice what I preach and to give other people the tips and the encouragement and the motivation to advocate for their own mental health.
I love that. Because it's as you were sharing and talking about your book. And by the way, we will have Melanie's book on her episode page, but her book is also a part of the Courting Happiness Library, which I'm so happy to share and to say. But I want to talk about kind of the journey of that, because one of the things that I've learned when I did my first TED Talk, and literally, hours after I defended my dissertation, and my committee goes, "Yay, you're Dr. Courtney Alston," and I went and my dissertation chair, Dr. Julie Dodd, who I talk about probably every episode, um, who reminded me, hey, you might want to go out and take a selfie and share it with individuals, which I did. But literally hours after that, I got my first invitation in regards to my TED Talk. Now, my TED Talk was about, I was asked to talk about the loss of a spouse, how when I was 25, working as a television reporter in Philadelphia, how I lost my late husband 83 days after marriage. And when I said yes to sharing the story, which at that point was close to 17 years, I was really excited, as you mentioned, being able to share this message to help individuals, because I think when you understand that your story can really serve, I think it speaks to so much value of really thinking about how it can help others. So to make a very long story short, throughout that journey of creating that talk, I had very vulnerable moments with myself of sharing my story, and really, looking at so many different elements of my life, not realizing when I did my TED Talk, when I finally did it, my mother would have passed away actually 2 months before that talk. And so I say all this to say is, I I'm so curious as to what you've learned about yourself because of this incredible work that you're doing, from sharing your message. I've seen Melanie share her message for a local news station in Dallas, and I've seen her work as it relates to her book and all of the great work that you're doing. So what have you learned about yourself that has also kind of helped fuel you, right, in terms of the work that you're doing as well?
I'm going to quote a fellow She Writes Press author, of a friend of mine named Caitlin Billings, because I have a quote on my desk right now, and I just read her beautiful manuscript. And it says, "To strive for perfection is the antithesis of actual self-acceptance."
Ooh.
I'll say it one more time. To strive for
Love it.
perfection is the antithesis of actual self-acceptance. I had to say that twice to get it inside my thick skull, because that has been my journey this year, is being more authentic and breaking the shackles of perfectionism and self-stigma. And I've often told people, including Caitlin, is because she's got her book coming out this year or next year, and said, writing about your mental health is one thing. Publishing, well, I'm mixing up my words, publishing and publicizing a book about it is another thing. So all of a sudden, all these secrets you've been keeping in your notebooks or on your computer are out in the world to see, and you've got to talk about it. And I know it was strange the first time I wrote an article that was published on a website, said something like, I have bipolar disorder, I have an eating disorder. And the first time I was a guest on a podcast and I said, I have depression, I have anxiety, I have bipolar disorder, that was strange. And I felt very vulnerable. And the same with my book, as I go into deep detail about my mental illness, some of the things I've done because of it, some of the things I've been ashamed of. And now I think, oh, these are all things that people can't unknow about me. And I had to kind of really unpack my own judgment and my own stigma toward myself. And I think, well, what's so wrong with that? What's so wrong with people knowing these things about you? I've had nothing but good feedback and nothing but sympathy from people. I feel kind of bad now because I have people like my neighbor and family members saying, oh, I wish I'd known that you were in so much pain. I wish I could have helped you. So being vulnerable about my truth has helped me really free myself of, again, these shackles of perfection and self-stigma and feeling like I had to keep up a facade to be perfect. It's this vicious cycle, especially in the corporate world, of pretending to be perfect, and that people reward you for being perfect. And then it just keeps going. And you feel like, when you get to that brick wall, you can't ask for help. So that's been a real blessing in disguise. Is being able to publish a book is a great thing. But then for the first time in, 42 years of my life, I'm finally being open about what's been going on with me. And that's been able to help me ease some of the burden I've carried, and then also help other people ease their burdens too.
I love that, because one of the things that I really treasure about the work that you're doing is you're talking about the value of sharing information. You're talking about the importance of, I really feel, partnership in the workplace, in terms of supervisors partnering as relates to employees, and in terms of really understanding, but then also valuing empathy and true compassion at work. And I think the work that you're doing speaks to that on so many different levels, in terms of there's a lot of great research out there as relates to compassion at work. It's actually a wonderful book called Compassionate Work that speaks to the levels of research in that area. And I love that you are not only talking about your story in terms of what that looked like at work, but then also really empowering this community as well as your community in regards to sharing their stories too. So I'm curious as to some of the transformative stories that you've heard, that an individual says, wow, sharing your story has helped me change my life.
I have a good story from a man who's does a martial arts podcast, and he invited me on, and he shared a very sweet story that he bought my book for his daughter, his teenage daughter, who was going through some struggles, some depression, things like that. And she had done Taekwondo as well. That's the martial art that I do. Taekwondo is a Korean martial arts, very similar to karate. And that's what I did to get through some of the worst of my mental health struggles. And she was kind of thinking about getting back into it. And she had heard about my book. I think they listened to another podcast that I was on. And she said, oh, I want to read Melanie's book, because she felt like she could get inspired from it. And so he bought her my book, and she read it, and she really resonated with the story. And she wanted to get back into martial arts training as well. And I got an email from a woman in London who was kind of in a similar situation. She'd gotten into martial arts, and she was out for a while. She was struggling with some things, some mental health things. She had a physical injury as well. And she was feeling really low in her confidence. And I don't even know how she came across me. Maybe she found my blog, or maybe she heard a podcast I was on, but she was excited to read my book and to get back into her martial arts training. And so those are two martial arts related stories. But what I really love are the stories I've gotten from people who say, you know what, I don't really care about martial arts. I'm not interested in doing it, but your story resonated with me. The mental health struggles. I had one person who has been through some eating disorder issues. There's a toxic relationship that's in the book, and they were in a similar situation. So that's what I really like too. I love, of course, hearing from fellow martial artists, but what I really love are hearing from people who say, "Oh, I feel you. I understand loneliness and sadness and depression and anxiety and desperation. Those are universal human emotions, whether you do a martial art or not." So that's been really special to me. And I'm sorry these people have gone through this, but I'm glad to know that a book that's on a very specific topic can still speak to them and make them feel like they're not alone.
And it's interesting. I really, gosh, it says so much about really the brilliance of your work, and that it allows us as human beings, right, to be able to share. And it also allows us to be able to feel that we aren't alone. Because I think one of the things that speaks and really resonates, in terms of us, in terms of the whole human condition, is the fact that it's allowing people and allowing us, and I say this often, to be seen. Right? We want, I think the worst thing I tell my students is that the worst thing that we can do is to not see a person. And what I love so much is about individuals sharing stories and sharing their life, and then feeling empowered uh, by listening to you or watching you or reading as it relates to your work, feeling empowered enough to be able to, step out and have a conversation that they may have thought that they would have never had before. And you are empowering them to do just that. And another thing that I really value, Melanie, that the work that you're doing, is that you speak about how it's important to share a part of you at work. What do you mean by that? And why is it so important?
I think we need to be more real about who we are. And I'm somebody who is paying the price for pretending to be perfect for so long. There's a lot I have to disassemble. I don't know if we can totally be our complete selves in the workplace. I kind of work in a formal environment, so I can't completely be myself, because I probably get fired for some of the things I'd say or the jokes I make or something like that. But I think we need to show that we're human, to show that we have feelings and emotions, and we don't need to disclose every facet of our personal lives, but it is nice to know that we are human beings outside our jobs. Not all of us live for our jobs, or our passions may lie outside the workplace. So getting to know each other as complete and whole human beings is important in being able to have compassion for each other. So the more you understand or you see somebody as a human being, probably the less likely you're going to be impatient with them, or maybe put pressure on them at 5:01 in the afternoon to respond to your email or something like that. And I'm talking about kind of the virtual corporate world, but it's different in other situations. But just showing that we're human. That's what we're all learning kind of the hard way with this pandemic, is that we are human beings. We are not robots. We cannot just keep carrying the weight of the world and pretend that nothing's wrong, and pretend that we don't need to be able to relax and have fun and have stability and security. Is that the more real we become, the more real and authentic other people see us. It's just like you telling your students, is that that's the most important thing, is a person knowing that they are seen.
Absolutely. And it's so important as it relates to being seen, is um, being able to share and to discuss. And I say that because, one of the things one of the people I also admire, her name is Dr. Brene Brown, and she's done incredible work in the area of vulnerability and empathy. and shame. And one of the things that Brene Brown, who's written several best-selling books and Oprah Super Soul Sunday, TED Talk, the list goes on about Dr. Brown and really her brilliance. But what I love so much is that she talks about if you want to take the shame out of something, you talk about it. And so what I value so much is the fact that you are sharing the value of having these very, very intimate and vulnerable discussions. So how can a person begin to kind of take those steps in kind of facing their fear and also kind of, walking through, so to speak, levels of taking the shame out?
That's a good question. And I think I'm still a work in progress. So I think what I would advise someone to do is think about what is your end goal? What is your goal for if you need something in your life to change, whether it's in a personal relationship or a job relationship or something like that? I'll think back to some of my corporate training of things like courageous conversations and think about the end goal. What outcome do you want out of this? Do you want to see some kind of behavioral change? Do you want a relationship dynamic to change? What is it that you want to change? And you work backwards from there. You think about your personal goals that you have for the situation. You may try to empathize with the other person and think about, well, what are their goals? Probably. You think about the relationship that you have with this person. Is this an ongoing relationship, like with a spouse or a boss or a coworker? Is this, somebody you'll have to interact with on a daily basis? And figuring out how to tell your story. So for me, writing is how I best express myself. And I knew that would keep me on track. So like with the conversation with my boss, I wrote it out. I edited it. I kind of figured out things that were just, me venting that were maybe more appropriate for my journal than for a conversation with my boss. And I planned it out. And then I also made time to listen too, because the people can't read your mind. So that's another thing too. We can't expect people to read our mind. And I think for a while I was expecting her to just pop up and say, "Oh, Melanie, seems like things aren't great. Let me wave a magic wand and fix it for you." People can't read your mind. People can't wave a magic wand. You got to be able to tell them your story, and you got to be able to listen too, because they're going to have questions, and try not to be, offended if people ask questions about it, because they're just trying to understand you. So getting to that place of understanding and being open about what your end goal is. And maybe the end goal is just, I need to get some things off my chest and tell them to another person. So you got me to do my day job on my off time. So that's the advice I'd give for having a courageous conversation.
I love it. And, I also, I value that I feel that this is not just a lesson, right? For those of us who are thinking about having this conversation at work, right? As it relates to, mental health. And I'm curious, what are your thoughts as it relates to the learning process? What do you feel that you sharing your story has taught your organization, and what we all can learn from in terms of other companies that are beginning to really reevaluate because they also want to retain good people, the talent and their workforce?
I think our organization is learning that our employees are not robots. They're really high performing. They're proud of the culture that we have that is high performing. And also, there are people at the end of that performance. So people's physical needs need to be taken care of. You want to be well compensated. You want to have a good work environment. But we also have brains attached to these bodies that are doing our work. And people's mental health is just as important as their physical health. And I think as I see things come up, and sometimes I get little mailers from our benefits department about mental health. I'm looking at one right now saying, "Are you taking care of you?" And that's from our benefits department. And so they're learning that we need to be taking care of ourselves as emotional, dynamic human beings who have personalities, who have different values, who have different needs. We all may be working towards the same goal, but we're individuals ultimately who have individual needs and goals. And so they're starting to learn that we may need to start working on meeting people where they are, rather than saying, you've got to toe the line and all, what is it? One of my coworkers says, sing from the same sheet of music, something like that. Is that they're starting to look at people as individuals who we all have brains. Our mental and physical health, our mental health is just as important as our physical health.
Absolutely. Absolutely. This is the part of the interview that I just don't like. And that is because this is, and I say this often because I love this conversation that we're having because it is so important. I believe that it is so empowering, right? And then also I really value the fact that an individual that may be listening now that may feel alone, right, and overwhelmed, and now they no longer feel alone and overwhelmed by hearing your story. So before we wrap up, there's a couple of questions I want to ask. So one question is, where can our audience find you?
They can find me in a couple of different places. So I have a blog, that's my main website, called Little Black Belt. Like little black dress, but it's a little black belt because I'm a Taekwondo black belt. So Little Black Belt has information about me, about my book. It has all of my media links. So that will include the link to this podcast, all my podcast and TV links, all of the articles that I've written about mental health, about martial arts, things like that are all on that site. As for social media, I'm probably the most active on Instagram. So I'm at Melanie Gibson Author. I'm also on Facebook and Twitter as Melanie Gibson Author. And then you can find my book, Kicking and Screaming, a Memoir of Madness and Martial Arts, on any major bookseller, Amazon, Barnes & Noble, IndieBound Bookshop, any place that you like to buy books, it's there. So I'm pretty easily findable.
Excellent. And well, you can actually buy Melanie's book on our website. So when you go to the Courting Happiness library, you can find it right there and make the purchase right there on our site. So I'm so excited to be able to share that. And you will also find all the other information that Melanie just shared as well in terms of her website, and then also where to find her on Instagram. So this is a question I ask everyone, Melanie, that appears on the Courting Happiness podcast, because, the podcast is all about helping individuals and organizations in regards to their happiness journey and well-being in the workplace. And so I always like to ask guests how they're committing to their happiness journey. So what are you doing to commit to your happiness journey?
Right now I'm seeing a therapist, and that's something that is a recovering perfectionist here. I had to go back and have a moment with myself and say, I'm not doing okay. I need to bring in some professionals. So I'm seeing a therapist, and that's something I've done in the past and I didn't do for a while. And now I need the help again for a while. So that's something I'm doing, is I'm getting a professional to help me, just like I went to a doctor when I had a knee problem. So we sometimes need outside help. And so also on my own, I do all kinds of fun self-care activities that make me happy. Like I journal. I've been playing classical guitar again. I took lessons many years ago and then stopped for a while. And so that's something, I don't have a lot of time to do it, but I get out my guitar and I play. And I do things with my partner, like watch movies, and we actually just started a comedy podcast, which is very different from the vein of what we're doing here. But we started a comedy podcast because I just needed something where I'm creative and I'm funny and I'm not doing my serious work and discussing mental health and martial arts and all that stuff. So finding something creative to do is something that is helping me maintain my happiness, keeping in touch with my family. I'm pretty much an introvert, but I try to keep in touch with my family over text and phone calls and emails. And so finding all those ways to fill the time when I'm not working with things that bring me joy.
I love that. I love that you talk about the value of all these positive activities that you have in your life and how you've embraced them. And then on top of that, because one of the things in positive psychology, I love how we qualify relationships as positive relationships. And I often tell people when I'm training and facilitating different speaking engagements, I always tell people to create their own self-care squad. And what I love so much about what you shared about your commitment is that you talked about the value and the importance of your therapist. And I often talk about my therapist a lot because I think it's important because of the fact that I think it's very important for people to understand the value of therapy, right? And just like I have a dentist, I have a primary, I saw another doctor yesterday as it relates to my physical health. To me, it's just as important to have a therapist that is serving as relates to, me in terms of my health. And so I love that you shared the value and the importance of having a therapist and what that looks like, along with embracing all of these incredible positive activities along the way. Melanie, you are extraordinary. I am so grateful as I think I'm wearing my gratitude shirt. Yes, I love all peace, love, and world shirts. And so I'm wearing it right now. That's talking about gratitude. And I'm really very grateful for the time you spent sharing your story and empowering us all to have really important conversations about mental health at work. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you, Dr. Courtney.
You can learn more about where to follow Melanie Gibson by visiting her episode page on the Courting Happiness podcast website at drcourtneyaulston.com/podcast/episode 58. And you can also purchase her book in the Courting Happiness library. Let's continue this conversation online. Email us at podcast@drcourtneyaulston.com. That's podcast at drcourtneyaulston.com. Join us on Instagram at Courting Happiness. Don't forget, that's courting with a K. Also, I hope you join our private Facebook community. You can find us at Courting Happiness Podcast Community. Our private Facebook group is a safe haven to share, meet more people looking to build positive relationships, focus on well-being, and create a happier life. Now, are you ready to spread happiness? We hope you subscribe and share this podcast with your family, friends, coworkers, and all the important people in your world. We release a new episode every Thursday. Congratulations on your continued commitment to your courting happiness journey. Thank you so much for listening. We want you to be well, be happier, and be kinder to yourself. We can't wait to see you next week.